A doo doo doo, a doo doo doo, a doo baby.
Dear Adelaide, so when I heard Dave mention this as a topic, I immediately thought, I could do this, but was it you, the people, or my age, the 20 to 30 period, that shaped me? Well, it was all of those things, but it was you where all of those things came together and I grew into my posture. Do you remember how I came to you? I had finished school, directionless, except knowing I was not ready for full-time work. So then what? I commenced that arts degree at Sydney Uni and became involved in the DIY punk rock community, going to lots of bands, a trip to the US, crashing on people's couches, and even staying with my favourite band in Chicago, Screeching Weasel. That's not made up, by the way. I completed about 2 years of the degree, and as I was studying anthropology, I was contemplating going north and getting on a boat to PNG. Yes, I was naive and still directionless. Instead, I fell in love with the singer of a punk rock band and moved to wonderful U Adelaide, where I lived with punk rock singer and worked with him in his business, a punk rock record label and distribution service. Remember all those mainly vinyl records and some CDs we imported from everywhere, and people wrote to us and ordered them, and we sent them this underground can't get in any shop music? It was the mid-90s and the internet was just starting to take off. Most of our correspondence with people overseas was via fax and very much later on email. And our correspondence with Australian customers was snail mail. There were no social networking sites at this time. So Adelaide, you were this cool city with all the cultural perks of a capital, but if you wanted stuff to happen, you kind of had to do it yourself. It fitted my punk rock philosophy. I want to mention that this first half of the letter is my much extended adolescent self, say 21 to 26-ish. I was part of the vegan, very politically conscious subculture of the punk community. As you're well aware, Adelaide, pot is decriminalised in your state, and this also fitted my DIY philosophy. Especially as I was living in your hills at this time, so to grow a plant or two alongside the veggie garden and smoke and eat this natural homegrown drug was all part of it. Looking back on this drug use at that time, I think my adolescence probably went on a couple of years longer than intended. I did manage to set up my own business, Organic Records, a record label where I put out split 7-inch vinyl singles with an Australian band on one side and an international band on the other. I was also fortunate to travel to India and later Vietnam. After 4 years or so, my relationship with punk rock band frontman dissolved. Not easy to live and work with someone, and I moved out. I'd given up those years to the business and had a year to find myself, so moved in with a girlfriend and started doing other things like going to, again, DIY, very Adelaide outdoor and indoor raves, sometimes consuming other not decriminalised substances. I started attending weekly Native American sweat lodges, yoga, and riding my bike everywhere as I was out of the hills and back in suburbia. Adelaide, you're a very flat city and easy to ride around, and it also feels like the sky is closer to the ground. I went to Adult Community College and studied Spanish and creative writing. I started my lifelong journey of reflection. Why am I going to yoga and sweat lodges and smoking pot? Somehow an emotional shift happened where I kept up with the yoga and stopped the smoking. The rental house was sold, my girlfriend moved to Melbourne, and I realised I needed to complete that arts degree. But Adelaide, if I moved back to Sydney, which I now knew was this huge, sprawling, difficult to get around and expensive city, so unlike you, I would probably be back living with my parents, and I really liked you. So I figured I could be a student and live relatively well, and I stayed and moved into what I will call my becoming an adult finally stage of life. I moved into Selihu, capital S-E-L-I, capital H-O-O, which is a Vanuatuan word meaning working together. Selihu is an intentional community, a house in suburbia that started in the late 70s. I was number 49 to move in and lived with 5 others at the time for the next 3 years. To get a room there, you had to be lucky but also be a particular way inclined. I actually fitted in well. No cars allowed, The driveway had long ago been ripped up and replaced with veggie patch. Vegetarian house, which was easy after being a vegan for 3 years. Follow the roster, which meant you had a household chore once a week, say clean the bathroom, but then you did not have to do this again for 5 weeks. That was cool. One night a week you cooked dinner and washed the dishes, but then every other night someone else did. If you were going to miss dinner, you could request a lunchbox. This house had been going for so long they had worked out all sorts of rules to avoid small conflict. For example, if I had to rush off to uni in the morning and did not wash my breakfast dishes, I just grabbed one of my name tags and left it on the bowl so people would know it would be dealt with by me at some point. We had a fortnightly household meeting. But since people in the house were activists of some kind or another and went to many meetings, we jazzed it up by calling our household meeting encuentro, which is Spanish for meeting. It was here that you were shamed if you had not completed your household chores. We had an agenda with 2 lists, bigs and smalls. I know encuentro would drive some people insane, but I'm kind of anal and neurotic and I liked it. Needless to say, there was no television and we used to play a lot of games. We had musical soirees, mandatory birthday breakfasts where you had to wear hats, bike rides into the hills. Sally, who not only had solar power, it had a solar oven, and of course chickens. We lived near the tram, the train and bike paths, and it was easy and I had a lot of free time because of the way the house worked. I continued with yoga and completed 2 Vipassana meditation courses. I managed to finish my 3-year arts degree just within the 10-year allowed time frame and made the decision to study further so I could actually be employable and get a paying job. I enrolled in a 2-year postgrad social work degree at Flinders Uni. I thought, social work. That was something to do with social justice, a strong value for me, and I knew I wanted that piece of paper to step into and earn money in mainstream society. At this time, the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a worldwide movement called Reclaim the Streets. Not Reclaim the Night, the Women's March, but Reclaim the Streets. It was where you organise, although it seemed random, to block off a street and have a party for people, not cars. Well, Sydney and Melbourne had Reclaim the Streets parties, so I decided you needed one too. A collective of us got together and held regular meetings. It took 6 months or so to plan and make some decisions, especially as we were working with the consensus model, which can slow things down. One of your main city areas is Rundle Street, which has cafes at one end, which then hits a mall, Rundle Mall, and then at the other end it changes its name to Hindley Street, which is the more down and out end of town. Of course, that was the place to have this event. We weren't that interested in yuppie cafes prospering. This was a party on the street. On the day, we had organised for people to meet at the main city square, Victoria Square, and we planned to march from there. It was awesome to see these few hundred people rock up at the time. Remember, no authorities knew about this, just the community. I had gone into the bus depot earlier that morning with my orange fluoro vest on and my hand-drawn map to explain that there was a community event happening in Hindley Street and they were to reroute the free city bus. I showed them how to miss that block. We definitely did not want public transport to be inconvenienced. You can imagine the high I was on from doing that and then helping to lead the march to Hindley Street. The tripods went up at each end with traffic liaison people to inform the traffic and live music kicking off powered by solar. We had sent out press releases and had media liaison people to talk to the media. Finally, the police turned up asking to speak to our leader. It took them some time to understand that there was no leader and it was a spontaneous event. They eventually accepted that it would not be worth the effort to move us. There were hundreds of people sitting on picnic rugs with their children enjoying this community event. That was an empowering event to be part of. Thank you, Adelaide. As you know, I'd been going to dance parties and it was through this different DIY scene that I met Andrew, my partner and father of my daughters. He was heavily involved in these dance parties, particularly the decor, including fire sculptures, not that I knew that when I met him. Andrew was from Melbourne and I know you provided opportunity and purpose for him that he wouldn't have probably found in Melbourne. Andrew ended up also living in Sellyhoo for a year, but let's say I don't think he would have if I hadn't been living there. We moved out together and I started working as a social worker, mainly in acute mental health settings. Then suddenly it had been 10 years. And I loved you so much that I knew if I didn't leave now, I would never leave you. My parents were all the way over in Sydney, but there was no way I was going to live there again. So we moved to Newcastle, and it is another place that is shaping me. But that story is for another day. Thank you, Adelaide, forever in my heart, Annette.